connecting security solutions with security leaders. Security you should know starts now.
Welcome to Security You Should Know. I'm your host, Rich Straffolino. Today, we're going to be talking about Incode Technologies and what they're doing in identity verification. Now, the problem that they're addressing is one we've seen in the news on cybersecurity headlines a whole lot over the last year: AI-powered fraud at the workplace. Helping us figure out why this is such a recurring problem, we're going to be talking with Nick Espinosa, the host of the nationally syndicated Deep Dive radio show, and Božidar Spirovsky, CISO over at Blue Dot. Nick, I'm going to start with you. Why are we still struggling with AI-powered fraud at work?
This is such, I think, a relevant conversation to have, primarily because AI is exploding in so many different ways. And by virtue of that, we have seen pervasiveness in everything from AI slop to AI-generated hallucinations being used in court to literal fraud in the workplace. And quite frankly, nobody wants to hire Kim Jong-un's second cousin thinking that you're hiring somebody else, right? So this, I think, is one of those last bastions that goes way beyond the standard know your customer situation, because we are now being able to use artificial intelligence through deepfakes and everything else to basically evade a lot of the traditional detection systems we've had to just verify identities. So I think this is a fantastic conversation to have.
All right, Božidar, I'm going to come to you. Why are we still struggling with this AI-powered fraud?
I think I can frame it a bit differently. Because of all the digital transformation hype that we've been seeing for the past, I'd say, 20 years, the most successful adopters of digital transformation are criminals. They are adopting it as early as possible, testing it as early as possible, using it as early as possible. So just as Nick said, everybody now is trying to use AI in some shape or form. Sadly for us, the criminals are great at it, like amazing at it. And they're doing it all the time. And they're ahead of the curve, really, especially in these video fakes or face overlays, voice overlays, etc. So I must say it is a very interesting use case, a very challenging proposition, especially in a remote environment. But I would like to hear what our host has to say about this. It's an interesting topic.
All right, well, today we're going to be talking with Fernanda Sotil, Senior Director of Strategy at Incode Technologies. Now, to start out, we're answering three essential questions. How do I explain the value of your solution to my CEO? What does your solution do, and what does it not do? And what is the pricing model? Fernanda, can you help us out, give us these preliminaries?
Sure. Happy to go through this. So we solve for the next evolution of workforce risk. So the issue isn't actually the technology. It is the human layer that our systems still trust, unfortunately, way too easily. So if you think about this, identity access management platforms authenticate devices, they authenticate credentials, but they actually don't confirm who's behind them. No. This is exactly the gap that AI is exploiting. And this is why identity has become the new attack surface inside the enterprise. So I'll give you very quickly two examples. During hiring, fake identities, fake candidates with stolen or AI-generated IDs are getting through interviews because their profiles, videos, and voices look very legitimate. And actually, after onboarding, attackers can very easily impersonate employees using cloned voices or deepfake calls to reset MFAs or at the help desk. So at all of these moments, that's all it takes to bypass even the strongest IAM setup. So Incode Workforce adds a real-world identity layer to the identity access management system. So whether companies use Okta, use Microsoft Entra, use Ping Identity, what we do is we seamlessly integrate with those solutions, and we verify the person behind every high-risk moment throughout the employee journey. From candidate interviews to day one onboarding to help desk resets, MFA resets, all of that is facilitated through a very easy setup. So in terms of how it works, the enrollment process is through which an employee or a candidate verifies only once by scanning a government-issued ID and taking a live selfie. We verify with automated tech and government sources that this is a trusted identity. And then at critical moments, at any future point, such as an MFA reset, at IT support, or at recruitment, Incode instantly verifies the person with a quick selfie match.
And what are we looking at in terms of pricing?
So we actually work through a per employee license model, the tiers based on number of employees. So it's very seamless. We want to ensure that organizations trigger Incode at any point or at any workflow or key moments. So there's no cap on usage.
All right, so this is super interesting. I'm intrigued. I need to hear more. Božidar, what other questions do you have for Incode Technologies?
Oh, so many. So I'm going to start with what I read on a website that you have is that you essentially train on people's faces. You train your model on people's faces. Am I right to understand that?
Correct. So I think one of the key sources of our advantage comes from proprietary AI. So we train on billions of verifications that adapt very fast to fraud. So you think of very different type of attack vectors, some more sophisticated than others. We train on those data sets. We make sure the data sets are representative on geography, on demography, and also on fraud type to make sure that we're always kind of like one step ahead of attackers.
Okay. So in that context, my question coming from the European territories is how do you comply with privacy? And how do you potentially avail our employees of not agreeing to their faces being part of your training data set?
That's a very good question. We have a very robust privacy and compliance framework. And specifically for Europe, we are GDPR compliant. We do have servers, so the data stays and relies safely in the EU. All of the data is encrypted. And we do have different verification types. So once employees are verified, let's say, match the government document with the employee profile or the employee directory, that information is immediately deleted, right? So there is kind of like just that attestation that is being shared back to the company and allows us to make sure that the employee is legitimate, that it's not a deep fake, and that is who they claim to be without having any type of liability on the data side.
But do you then train your AIs on the faces that you have recorded?
So if the employee does not provide consent or the organization does not provide consent, we immediately delete the data and we do not train.
Okay.
On that specific vector.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to hand over to Nick for the next one, maybe.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this kind of opens up a can of worms in terms of trust, right? Like, where does trust originate? What does it require? So if Incode's goal, for example, is, quote, powering a world of trust, end quote, which I got off your website, what are the minimal conditions for trust? So is it purely technological, like accuracy and security, or is it also legal, social, psychological, physiological, anything like that? How does Incode measure or anticipate trust beyond, let's say, error rates and fraud prevention then?
That's a very good question, Nick. And we actually have different levels of assurance in our platform. So if you think about the very basic question, the first question would be like, are you actually real, right? So making sure that there's in fact a live individual on the other side of the transaction. The second level of trust would be, are you who you claim to be, right? So that requires a different set of information that we need to get from the employee in this case, maybe tied to a government document, a selfie. Through facial recognition, we perform the matching. And that allows us to verify that in fact you are Nick. Then maybe the third level of trust would be like, can I safely transact with you, right? And that's when we integrate a lot of different data sources. We connect with government sources. We also connect with other transactional data. And through our network, we're able to kind of like attest, is this individual associated with maybe illegitimate actions, first-party fraud, third-party fraud? And what is the trust score that we could issue back to the relying party? So, I mean, not all organizations want to be at the third level of trust, right? So that's why our technology and our architecture would be able to adjust based on what question individuals or organizations are trying to solve for.
Gotcha. So one quick follow-up, and then I will kick it over to Bolzdar. So I have to understand then, as just an immediate dovetail, how do you balance global scale with local variation and identity documents, all those kinds of things? So according to your website, you support roughly 4,600 different document types from 200 countries, but documents, norms, legal standards, jurisdictions, identity, privacy laws, all this kind of stuff is various and it continuously changing. So how are you basically keeping up with that? What are the trade-offs that you're making here between all of these different standards?
That's a very good question. I'll try to answer it and capture mostly everything. So we do have a proprietary fraud lab. And basically the main mission of the fraud lab is to be able to deploy as more robust data collection methods as we can. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have extremely high coverage globally. So we collect data through different sources. We have third-party companies that help us with data collection. We also do it ourselves for like more specific fraud vectors. We create those data sets in-house. And we also do it through our customers. So one of the big benefits that we have is just like scale. We work with one of the 8 out of the 10 top banks in the US, 3 out of the top 4 telcos in the US. So overall, the reach and the scale that Incode currently has allows us to just have a high volume of data that's enabling us to iterate on fraud quicker than anybody else, right? In terms of compliance standards and privacy standards, we do have a very strong last mile team that's able to assess what are up and coming regulation, what are things that we should be considering within our workflows, within our product from a compliance perspective. We have very strong relationships with regulators. So overall, kind of like the promise of Incode is being able to iterate with the environment in terms of fraud, in terms of regulation, and also in terms of compliance and user preferences.
Okay, so I'll just jump in. Let's talk briefly about flow. So I'm being a user, and for whatever reason in a company, and for whatever reason I lost my credentials. Maybe I dropped my phone in the toilet or whatever happened. And now I need to re-authenticate. And then I go through your process. For whatever reason, again, your machine says, I'm not who I am. What is my recourse in that question? And the follow-up on that, which I think is even much more painful, is you mentioned candidates. And me being an insider to the company, I can probably find a way to get to somebody who knows me personally and unlock me. However, for candidates, that is a much more challenging topic. So what would a candidate do if they consider that they have been misclassified?
That's a very good question. And that's the big challenge that we work with, which I think also hits on a couple of like Nick's questions, which is the balance between best user experience or best conversion, also with accuracy on the fraud side. So I think something that we need to understand is that Incode is preventing one of the key vulnerabilities that enterprises face today. So security is our biggest concern. That being said, our machine learning models are very, very customized. And that's a benefit that we have because the machine learning models are created in-house. So there's a lot of different controls, there's rules, and there's thresholds that allows us to fine-tune the models so that we make sure that we recognize very quickly those legitimate users and also do not block them and also do not let in attacks or fraudulent attempts. In the case that you were mentioning, we actually have very strong retake mechanisms. So if a user is incorrectly blocked, then there is a capability for them to get another verification link through which they can verify identity. I don't have the stat top of mind, but it's less than 1% of users that would be incorrectly verified at their second try. So I think the likelihood that a user would be incorrectly blocked is extremely low. That said, we can fine-tune the thresholds. On the candidate experience, you do call out a very important point, which is the balance, the tolerance that users have for friction is lower. So we need to ensure that the flows that we're designing are even more intuitive and friendly for the end user with the right recovery processes in case they get incorrectly blocked.
So a follow-up on that, is there a way for the organization? And I'm thinking here about a couple of different, let's say, employee or candidate experiences, mainly because most candidates are already filtered through a bunch of AIs. And sincerely said, people hate all these AIs. So let's not beat around the bush. And now, lo and behold, another AI. So question from practical perspective, whether an organization using your product can see the error rate of your system and whether they can decide to have a different flow if that error rate exceeds something or in some specific cases. I mean, let's go manual for whatever reason.
That's a very good question. So we do offer two certain things. The first one is we offer a passive verification in which the user doesn't need to do anything, doesn't need to provide a government document or share their selfie. We verify the identity by connecting with government sources and verifying that the data that the user is presenting matches official databases. So that's a verification method of lower level of assurance, but it is for sure much less friction for the user. Let's say users advance through the process, they're going through live interviews, or they're maybe going through a background check. Then in addition to that, we can complement those processes with the live government document capture and selfie. In terms of accuracy, we do share very, very strong analytics to customers and show them metrics for false positives, false negatives, conversion rates, etc., throughout every single stage of the funnel. And something that we offer customers is very strict SLAs, both on false positive side, which means fraud that we let in, and false negative, which is legitimate users that we incorrectly blocked. So we constantly fine-tune those models and those processes to ensure that we're always exceeding those SLAs. If there were a situation where we're, for some reason, blocking too many users, then we would be able to adjust and have some sort of additional method of verification. From what you personally shared in terms of manual verification, we typically found that that is actually results in worse SLAs just because there's a human reviewer, there's a queue. Human reviewers actually today cannot tell deepfakes from real or fake anymore. So that just drives us to think like automated technology is much better from a user experience standpoint in terms of speed, but also accuracy, right? And the level of performance.
We have time for one last question.
I have to ask, and I need to pivot a little bit about this because what you just said really makes me start thinking about future-proofing adversarial defense. So think about adversarial threats that we're looking at right now: deepfake, spoofing, morphing, synthetic identities, et cetera, et cetera. Incode offers passive liveliness, deepfake detection, fraud prevention networks, all this kind of stuff. But we all know that adversarial basically attacks are going to evolve. They simply are, whether it's AI or something else. So what is Incode's strategy for anticipating new forms of fraud or spoofing? How quickly can you update or patch your models for detection pipelines? And honestly, I hate to ask this question, but I think it's important. Do you think there are attack vectors right now that you cannot currently defend or that might require fundamentally different technological or legal frameworks that Incode isn't addressing or is on the roadmap or whatever that looks like?
So that is a very good question, and I'm very glad that you asked it, Nick. I think our approach is to have a multi-pronged approach towards quickest defense. So in fact, in terms of adversarial attacks, it is a cat and mouse game. The quicker that we're able to iterate, then fraudsters will be able to also move very quickly. Now, as you mentioned, there's no way we can articulate the speed at which these things are evolving. We have a proprietary fraud lab, which is something that I already described, that consists of data collection methods through our customers, through our own customers, through third-party organizations. We also have a program with penetration testing companies. So we work from a range between 5 to 8 different penetration testing companies that constantly test Incode's technology month over month, that are able to call out vulnerabilities and that are able to help our in-house fraud team remediate them and adjust them. The other thing that we're doing is we're partnering with universities. So we're now deploying our machine learning models in collaboration with very well-known universities. So the Purdue University in Indiana, it's one of the universities that is at the forefront of fraud detection, in specific with everything that is related to computer vision. So we're partnering very closely with them to be able to ensure that our approaches are complementary to each other and that they're also providing an additional perspective in terms of evals and trainings to call out where we have gaps. So to your question, we do have gaps. We close them as quick as we can, sometimes as quick as even hours. And if we identify that there's specific documents or fraud vectors that we currently don't cover, those can be patched up over days.
All right, and Fernanda, what's one thing we didn't ask about that we need to know?
Probably something that's interesting for the audience is how do you work with other enterprise systems? So would you replace an Okta? Would you replace a Microsoft Entra? How does this work with an MFA or with a single sign-on? Something to call out is that we're highly complementary. In fact, we have a very strong partnership with them. We have a turnkey integration with most of the identity systems out there. We also integrate with help desk systems. So if users need to trigger an Incode verification directly from a service desk platform, maybe it be Zendesk or ServiceNow, they can do so. And we also integrate with HR systems or recruiting systems, ATS systems. So overall, the technology is very flexible. It's very modular from what you saw. Our team is incredibly robust and strong. So we're very excited to be partnering with companies that want to solve for this use case. And we look forward to hearing more from other problems that we could tangentially solve with this type of solution.
Well, that's just about it for this episode of Security You Should Know. To learn more, head over to incode.com. And if you have any feedback or questions for Fernanda, send them over at feedback@cisoseries.com. A huge thanks to Nick and Bojidar for helping us learn more about what Incode Technologies is doing. And thank you to you, Fernanda, for being game and for your time in answering all of these questions. And thank you for listening to Security You Should Know.
That wraps up another episode of Security You Should Know. If you like this program, please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a review. All companies showcased on this program are sponsors of CISO Series. If your company would like to be spotlighted and interviewed by our security leaders, go to our contact page on cisoseries.com or just email us at info@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to Security You Should Know, connecting security solutions with security leaders.